Alright, so in this segment, we're going to be talking about this article from Tony Connolly, written the 21st of May, which is London's long game on the protocol. So he talks about how the UK have effectively gone for a longer term strategy on it. It's a very long article. There's a lot to talk about here, a lot of great work from the man himself. So what I'd advise is have some tea or something ready, because it's going to be a long one, so buckle up. Having laid down the gauntlet in the House of Commons on Tuesday at the time, the government challenged the European Union to renegotiate the protocol, saying, if you don't renegotiate, the UK will introduce legislation and change it unilaterally. Now, Liz Truss was meant to have this legislation ready of that week. It was about 2 weeks ago now. She didn't, because I think she thought the EU would cave. That's what she thought was going to happen, because she said we'd have the legislation ready. Then you had grumblings about it wouldn't be ready until the end of the month, which would have been May. This video is going to go out in June. So they weren't prepared to go through with it, and the simple fact is this legislation might not be ready till the end of summer. So I think Parliament goes on recess in July, and it might not be ready until in and around June, end of June, kind of start of July. So she's botched it big time. She's botched this one massively. It is immediately clear that EU is not going to give their chief negotiator Šefčovič a new mandate. Dead on arrival, says EU diplomats. So we've covered stories in the past about how EU diplomats have said we're not going to budge, effectively, and the idea was that the EU gives the UK the October proposals in the hopes that getting those, trying to get those to work and then seeing what can we do after that. That's why the EU are sticking so strongly to the October proposals, which we'll go through at some point again. And the reason behind that is obviously you're not going to cave when you're put under pressure. When you're being threatened. Because if you cave when you're under threat, that sets a precedent of every time there's a problem, the UK will go back to the same thing, which is essentially this is a rerun of the Internal Market Bill. Šefčovič spoke to EU ambassadors. One told him, not only do you not need a new mandate, if you ask for one, we would not give it to you. So essentially they've told him, like, mate, good luck with this one. We're not moving. Diplomats have repeatedly been wary of Liz Truss's proposals, saying essentially the UK's command paper from last July were tried time and time again by the UK, from Theresa May to Boris Johnson. They were rejected, essentially saying, you tried this before, don't bother. The UK threatened essentially unilateral changes back then, and there was the idea that the reason why the UK didn't accept the October proposals is because the UK still at the time were coming back from the July command papers, so they would have looked like a major come down if they went from the command paper to the October proposals, for example. The EU was not caught off guard either. The UK has been briefing individual member states that this was coming, and I don't know why the UK was doing this. Liz Truss and others briefed really aggressively in the press, etc. The EU are absolutely prepared for this. Surely, if you're going to make a move like this, you would want to catch the EU off guard. It doesn't make sense. Šefčovič is said to be angry and frustrated with the UK that the UK has escalated the dispute by placing a gun on the table, which, the guy gets paid a lot of money, but he's got to deal with some of the biggest clowns in the UK. I think the guy had to deal with Frost. He has to deal with Liz Truss. I mean, he's lucky he didn't have to deal with Michael Gove, to be honest with you. When he and the EU and EU capitals believed that last October's proposals to solve the problems had unexplored potential, and that's something we'll talk about in another video, where they were saying they were going to cut around 80% of the SPS checks, etc., to make it a lot easier to export goods between GB and NI, and that potential has now been dashed. They talk about Trust has collapsed. London is simply demanding a brand new protocol, which isn't going to happen. The EU has to negotiate from a place of strength, not weakness, just like all countries and institutions have to. How things go from here is uncertain, which is true that I don't know where things go, because the UK again have set a very high stall about what they want, and the EU have not moved from where they are. So essentially both sides have to move, or at least one side has to move, and I can't imagine the EU doing it, and if the UK do it, it's going to make us look very stupid again. The only thing I can imagine is Liz Truss comes out with something very similar to the October proposals and says this is a British idea, and tries to use that as a way to kind of break the impasse. That's the only smart thing she can do. Truss announced she had asked for an EU-UK committee. She apparently texted somebody, probably Šefčovič, about it, but such a meeting is normally convened for key developments. When you need a lot of a lot of support kind of thing to get through certain bits of negotiations. Essentially, it's a meeting with a lot of people to kind of figure out where to go from next. The EU does not regard Truss's ultimatum as a new development, because we've been banging on about this since last July. It's been almost a year. Them saying we have no idea when the joint committee meeting will take place, said one EU source, because at the end of the day, this is not new for them, and if they kind of entertain these talks, it does give Liz Truss what she wants, which is she wants to beat down the EU in order to endear herself to the ERG and the other, loonies in the Tory party, not just the MPs but also the members. British officials have made it clear that there is no point in talking if the EU insists on the October proposals remaining a baseline of the negotiations. But the thing is, the October proposals will remain the baseline for negotiations, purely because that was the last thing offered by them. So it's going to be in and around what the October proposals were, a large cut to SPS checks, etc. It feels like such a long time since October, so I'll probably re-go over it, because I think I did at the time. I remember there was a Tony Connolly thread I think I covered about it. The EU feels like it's being blackmailed, because it is, in the sense of the UK is saying, look, either you give us a new protocol, you give us exactly what we want, or we're going to get rid of it in domestic law. And if it goes to court, we goes to court. Because the UK will say, oh, who cares about the EU law anyways? The EU's genuine effort to find solutions have been dismissed in favour of confrontation, which is the strategy that the UK have used for a while now, which is not the diplomatic strategy of talking, negotiations, cooperation. It's very much kind of the old empire mentality of we're going to fight you, etc. We're going to get what we want, screw what you think. Diplomats in Brussels restate the fact that Northern Ireland is part of the EU's regulatory and customs space, and that can't be unravelled without casting the protocol aside. Now, what that's in relation to is the idea that Liz Truss pushed, that businesses in Northern Ireland should be able to manufacture their goods according to EU law or UK law, depending on what they want to do, which is obviously stupid and causes a lot of problems. Britain insists that the existing protocol is a threat to the Good Friday Agreement, which absolutely, again, isn't true. The Good Friday Agreement is an international agreement. The Northern Ireland Protocol is an international agreement. And so what that means is it doesn't need cross-community consent. That's something we'll talk about in a future video, that the Northern Ireland institutions cannot be restored until it is radically changed. But again, that's the DUP. That's a DUP problem. And the Northern Ireland Protocol, because it's an international agreement, it doesn't need cross-community consent, which does seem odd given that it's going to impact the people in Northern Ireland the most. But given the fact that it's actually benefited people in Northern Ireland a lot, I don't think you'll see a ton of people complaining. You can see that in the result of the recent elections in Stormont, where the vast majority of MLAs elected are pro-protocol. EU diplomats say there is a narrow window for a deal, but only on the basis of the October proposal. So again, the EU, I don't think are going to move far from the October proposals. Member states already view the 4 proposals on medicines, customs, agri-food controls, and granting Northern Ireland stakeholders a greater role in implementing the protocol as a major shift. And to be fair, these were some of the arguments people made, like, how is it fair that medicines made in Great Britain can't go to Northern Ireland? But they're fixing that issue by the looks of it. Customs, they were looking at cutting around 80% of the customs. It will still keep some of the more difficult, more onerous things in there, but they'll get rid of a decent chunk of them. And granting Northern Ireland stakeholders a greater role in implementing the protocol. Again, that's really what should have happened from the start. Northern Ireland should have had a greater say on the protocol, but putting that in the October proposals, again, it's a good thing that Northern Ireland should have more of a say, where the EU haven't even pushed for the protocol to be implemented fully. They haven't really pushed that one because they know it's going to cause more problems. That's why they're kind of offering things that would kind of make it easier, such as cutting the amount of checks. But they did also talk about how the UK needs to create more border posts, in the construction of permanent border control posts, specific packaging and labelling indicating that goods are for sale in the UK only. Things like this, which would make it easier for the customs officials to deal with the goods moving from GB to NI without having to worry as much that they'll be moved on into Ireland or other parts of the EU. One that would not change the protocol, but that had the potential to largely deliver the easements Northern Ireland businesses and citizens were looking for, because fundamentally you're not going to get the more radical unionists who want the end of the protocol, but you might get some of the unionists who say, okay, look, the protocol is an issue for these reasons, what can we do to kind of fix this? That's where the EU are kind of really doing their best work, I think. Indeed, whereas Liz Truss told the House of Commons at the time the UK would legislate to introduce a green channel. And again, you can kind of make this stuff work, but there'll still be paperwork needed. That's the issue. Where I think that you've talked about how if there are goods traveling between GB and NI, for example, the paperwork would be would be reduced a lot, purely because they don't have to go through the full rigmarole of checks. If it's like a company, I think like Sainsbury's, which only operates in the UK, for example, or mainly in the UK, where they don't have a branch in the Republic of Ireland, right? That's one way you could put on a trusted trader scheme, whereas maybe a company like Marks and Spencer's, they wouldn't be able to go on a trusted trader scheme because they have a branch in the Republic of Ireland, stuff like that, really. The EU has also spoken of an express lane that would deliver a similar outcome. So again, this is where you can get some movement where the UK can talk about a green lane, for example, or a trusted trader scheme, and that you can talk about something similar with a different name, and Liz Truss can say, "Oh, look, we got the green lane, so goods can go way easier into Northern Ireland," and the DUP can get mad because there still will be checks there, but it'll be far better than the system now. If you see what I'm saying. The difference is the EU believes that an express lane is contingent on knowing what the risk of goods illicitly crossing the border is. And that's another thing where one of the reasons I think there are such aggressive checks going on in the Irish Sea, far more than there probably was envisioned, is because the EU doesn't have access to data on what's actually crossing in the Irish Sea. And that's a huge problem because how do you know which goods are at risk of going into the Republic of Ireland, for example, if you don't really know what's going into Northern Ireland because there's no border there? And that the knowledge must be based on real-time access to UK databases that's still not been fully granted. They've been waiting for that for 18 months, and that might be, I think, one of the reasons why the EU haven't been, the kind of checks are a bit more aggressive than what the EU probably originally envisioned, because they thought they would have access to data which the UK hasn't actually given yet. Another fundamental blockage is that both sides start from a different position when it comes to risk, and this is where it gets a bit comical from the UK side. I found this really stupid, to be honest. So the UK argues the starting point for risk should be the risk of unregulated goods entering the single market. They say the goods at risk entering the single market is minimal, and that any risk must be proven post facto and then dealt with. So essentially they're saying goods moving into the Republic of Ireland is minimal, and once goods have leaked into the Republic of Ireland, at that point you can kind of deal with the leak, essentially, which the EU are taking a more proactive approach, saying that they believe there is an inherent risk for goods moving into the Republic of Ireland from Northern Ireland, which is true because certain shops operate in both, and certain shops would need maybe raw materials from Great Britain or from Great Britain in order to operate. So they could funnel the goods through Northern Ireland to avoid a lot of the checks. So again, a proactive approach is far better than a reactive one, but that shows you the difference in mentality from, say, certain EU member states and the UK, which are very reactive, and that causes problems. British officials say the trusted trader scheme would put the burden of risk on the company selling the goods using commercial and not necessarily UK customs data. But the thing is, the EU want access to the UK customs data. Officials stress that the nature of retail consignments bound for supermarkets that only have branches in Northern Ireland and the threat of criminal sanctions against those companies which don't comply should eliminate the risk. But the problem is, if these companies can get away with it, they will, because at the end of the day, there's no way to really check what's going in and out unless you do some really aggressive checks in the Republic of Ireland to see which have goods leaked in from Great Britain. And again, that could cause problems because how do you know which goods have gone from GB to, say, the Republic of Ireland directly and have gone through all the checks compared to goods that have gone from GB to the Republic of Ireland via Northern Ireland? How will you know? And that's the thing where the UK are going to have to answer that question. The EU believes whittling down risk requires confidence building on both sides in an organic process. The more real-world experience provides evidence of a low risk through checks and risk analysis, then mitigations can follow. Because if you have access to the data and you can see, a lot of goods are staying in Northern Ireland, right, because they're not sold or they're not made in the Republic of Ireland, then you can lower the checks on certain goods. But the only ways to do that is by having a trusted trader scheme that really works, and of course, access to the data. That's the key here. The EU position is very much focused on the facts and the risk, said one Brussels official. So at the end of the day, the less checks there are on the Irish Sea, the more chance there is of goods leaking into the Republic of Ireland, leaking into the EU single market. And that's what the EU are fundamentally worried about. So there would only be mitigations if you've got the data to demonstrate that it can work. And the UK say we're sick of experts, we're sick of data, etc. When this is the only way to make things work. Why this IT system isn't operational 18 months down the line, I have no idea. If anyone knows, please let me know. Where based on the data, you're able to relax things gradually, and therefore, if certain goods aren't, if you believe them not at risk to go into the single market, you can lower the checks on them. But if you think some goods are more at risk, based on the data, you can increase the checks on them. Diplomats concede that 18 months of the protocol in operation, the lived experience shows that the risk to the single market is lower than originally envisioned. And they've done that based on the fact that they haven't even got most of the data, and yet they've made such a calculation that the risk of goods leaking into the single market is very low. So if they have access to the data, they can see how much of a problem things are. And that's reflected in the October proposals where they're saying they'll cut the amount of goods being checked, etc. However, the view is that this does not warrant the entire risk model being overturned as the UK is demanding, which is true, that just because the risks are lower than what the EU originally envisioned doesn't mean you get rid of the whole thing. Just because crime is lower than you expect doesn't mean you get rid of a whole police force, for example. Sources say the EU has kept some of its firepower in reserve in terms of future concessions, because this again is a really interesting one. As I said earlier, they were going to use the October proposals as a baseline, and then once they got more data and more information and more trust with the UK, they can say, okay, look, the October proposals are going really well. Here's what more we can do to kind of lower the problems of goods going from GB to NI. The give and take is now in jeopardy because of the UK escalation, say officials. And again, if the EU wanted this to go to court, they could have taken us to court by now because the UK took unilateral action last summer. So if the EU wanted to, go all out here, they could have done. But they didn't. And there's a reason behind that, because they want this thing to work. None of these options have been fully explored, and I can't see that suddenly being the case against the backdrop where the UK is putting a gun on the table, says one source. Šefčovič told MEPs that the EU would be prepared to change its own customs rules to facilitate a reduction in customs formalities, again only if the UK get back to the October proposal. So, these arguments that these Brexiteers and Tory MPs make about the EU being inflexible is simply not the case. They have been very flexible. The October proposals are more evidence of that, especially when you've got Šefčovič saying there's more stuff potentially on the way if the UK accepts the October proposals, where we can move on to the next thing. It's just comical, to be honest. Reducing the number of customs entries for goods entering Northern Ireland would require changes, in the same way the EU changed its own legislation on medicines to ensure the free flow of drugs to Northern Ireland. Of course, medicinal drugs, not illegal drugs. Member states have been aware of this since last October, so they've already made changes themselves to really help things out here, to their own rules around third country medicines, which, again, something they didn't have to do. UK officials say the general sweep of EU proposals will not remove the chilling effect whereby the paperwork discourages hundreds of GB companies from shipping goods to Northern Ireland from GB, but they can at least reduce a lot of the checks, which will help entice companies to do that. But wherever you put a trade barrier, there's always going to be companies reluctant to export goods. We've seen that exports are dying from GB to France, for example. That's what happens if you put a trade border in the way. Nor does it diminish the sense of anger amongst unionists. I mean, again, cry more that their sense of British identity is being eroded by a trade border on the RSC. If you're that annoyed about your identity being eroded, why don't you just move to Great Britain at that point? Why not just move to Britain? Why not move to England or Wales or Scotland, for example? Normally I'm not an advocate for that, but if you're genuinely obsessed with the union, just move here then, and that way you won't have to worry about checks in the RSC, for example. A more pertinent question is, when did the UK decide to embark on this confrontational approach, which again is another interesting question, given that Liz Truss was less annoying to deal with than Lord Frost was. Lord Frost was very confrontational. Now he's on ice, and Liz Truss has gone back to the Frost playbook. UK officials have suggested that Truss made up her mind in February or March that the current trade talks with the EU are pointless and the UK had no choice but to legislate. However, it's clear that since early 21, the UK has set its sights on firmly replacing the protocol. That was seen with the command paper, etc. And let's not forget that collective responsibility still exists amongst the cabinet. If any of the cabinet officials disagreed fundamentally with what Frost was doing, they could have resigned. Collective responsibility exists for the cabinet, as it always has done. Indeed, my understanding is that legislation to do this has been in preparation long before February or March of this year, even before the EU published its October proposal. So, what if that's true? It's according to a source in the Cabinet Office. If that's true, what that means is the UK had no intention of accepting the October proposals whatsoever. Whatever the EU offered, anything short of scrapping the protocol, the UK would never have accepted. As a member state, the UK regularly enshrined EU regulations into domestic law, sometimes even gold-plating them, making them above and beyond the EU rules. And on exiting the EU, a lot of that has remained. Frost and Mogg have waged a campaign to locate and repeal these legacy rules as part of the project to allow Britain to set its own regulations. But if you do that, then that's going to cause problems with exports to, the EU, exports to France, the Netherlands, Sweden, etc., and cause more problems for exporting goods from GB to NI as well. Lawyers drafting the legislation are understood to have looked at ways of giving ministers powers to replace or repeal such retained EU laws with the stroke of a pen, so essentially be done by executive action almost, where they're going to draft laws where these things can be repealed by Downing Street by the sounds of it. Without repealing Section 7A of the protocol, Downing Street would not be able to change the protocol without facing court action. So essentially, what their goal is, they're going to bypass the UK courts by changing the domestic law. And once this goes to court, if it goes to arbitration, that's one thing. But if it goes to the European Court of Justice, what the UK will say is, it's an EU court. Obviously they're going to side with the EU. I think that's what they're going to do. A careful reading of Frost's intervention in 21 suggests the latter explanation is possible, if not likely. That the UK were always going down this route, and maybe Liz Truss was always going to do this. Indeed, unusually for a policy document, the command paper opens with sharp denunciation of the rationale for the protocol, even though the only reason we actually got, the withdrawal agreement and everything done was because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. That was the keystone of it all, really. Otherwise, nothing else would have moved. The government does not accept and has never accepted that the Northern Ireland Protocol was the only means of protecting the Good Friday Agreement, including this North-South dimension. That other solutions are foreseeable both within and outside the framework of the protocol that subsequently emerged. What outside the protocol subsequently emerged. He's going to moan about Article 16 and all of this nonsense because that's all they do. Even though one of the commissioners, I think at the time, proposed just having export licenses. So for vaccines to go from Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland, they would need an export license. They weren't even necessarily proposing Article 16 from kind of what I've read around it. But even, we've gone about this ad nauseum, where the point where no one actually invoked Article 16. Someone in the commission was mulling it over. It looks like it was leaked, and the Irish government told them to sit down and shut up because it was stupid. It was never going to work, and instead this is what they cling on to. The real turning point was 29th of January last year when the EU were going to invoke Article 16. Blah 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 blah. Then the EU turned around and said it proposed to ban exports of vaccines across the land border. So that's where they talk about the export licenses being needed. And again, depending on how you want to frame it, this seems a lot worse than it is. But if you talk about the need of export licenses, then it doesn't sound like that's problematic at all, really, does it? So it depends how you want to frame it. Member states immediately saw the UK reaction as a cynical, overblown weaponisation of the clumsy error. And to be fair, whoever the rookies that were involved in this, I hope you've learned a lesson here, which is don't be stupid. Because honestly, that was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. I genuinely despair at whoever in the commission come up with that. There's a bit more in the article I want to talk about to scroll down a fair bit because this article's hella long. The question is whether Boris Johnson will oblige and force a complete breakdown in relations with the EU, including a potential trade war, because that's where we're heading, to keep the DUP and ERG on board. And as Johnson's favourability amongst Conservatives, according to Conservative Home, is at minus 15%. I think he might be the most hated Tory in the Tory party, or at least hated MP. That's madness. The Prime Minister being the most disliked person. All this to keep these clowns. However, it's clear that the EU is not going to budge, sticking to the line that there is potential for the October proposals to deliver genuine results, and I think that it could help a lot. Elsie Pallas, which is in France, and the German Chancellery have both made it clear that Šefčovič's approach is fully supported, and what that means is he's got a mandate from the EU leaders, essentially the different heads of state, to carry on with this. And what that means is that he's not going to get a new mandate from them. France in particular is watching the UK's divergence agenda and how that might impact upon the protocol. Again, smart, because the UK are looking at deregulation, so I would keep an eye on them if I were France, and also other EU states. The EU has also made it clear that the legal action against the UK for unilateral moves on export health certificates, parcels, and pet travel can be unfrozen, which is true. But again, if it doesn't go through arbitration, if it goes through an EU court, I'm slightly concerned about that. Just one more thing from something up here. The TCA is impacted by UK divergence as well. There was that whole thing about Barnier, he was at a football pitch saying looking for a level playing field. If the UK decide to deregulate, the EU can put tariffs on certain UK goods, for example, in retaliation. He has trusted his Brexit policy to hardliners, Frost and Mogg, the AG Suella Braverman, who again, she won't publish her legal advice, which is very frustrating. And they have successfully brought their confrontational approach to this high noon moment. And it genuinely did feel like that. I think it's come down a fair bit because Liz Truss has toned down the rhetoric a bit. But I think it's really important to remember that we are still very close to a trade war. If this is all about Johnson's political survival, then he would most likely keep the threat of legislation on the table until the October party conference, at which point his leadership could be seen as being out of danger. And, he's on the precipice of a no confidence vote. So now is the perfect time to start a trade war with the EU because this will help cement his position. Why would you change a leader now? Then he could decide to do a trade deal based on, roughly speaking, on the October proposals to avoid a trade war. So essentially, what Tony Connolly is kind of hinting at here is the UK starts, a massive spat with the EU in order to keep Johnson in office until conference. And once he's in conference, his position will be relatively safe. He can rally everyone back together, and then he can go back to the October proposals and kind of get something there. Which, again, if that is the case, some great analysis from Mr. Connolly. And it could be Johnson's gamble that he wants to look for a fight in order to get through this next hurdle. And again, I don't know what the man's endgame is. It's very difficult to figure out. Apart from survival, the only thing he cares about is survival. Anything above that is a win for him. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. If the no confidence vote goes ahead, which it could do some point soon, I'll keep you guys updated on that. But I'll catch you in the next one.